Hi, welcome to our channel Good New. Since the United States updated the chip regulations for Russia, an increasing number of firms have ceased their operations in Russia at the request of the United States. All of the factors are inextricably linked to U.S. regulations. Russia is now an excluded item for semiconductor companies. Even the world's largest chip foundry, TSMC, halted exports to Russia in February of this year. In actuality, the impact of the inability to manufacture chips is negligible. After all, Russia may have little choice except to manufacture mid to low-end chips. However, there is a greater concern currently, which is equal to taking money from the bottom of the Russian chip. The chip architecture business arm is rumored to be suspending Russia's authorization. So, what effect will ARM's action have on Russia if it is fully implemented? What can Russia do in the future to mitigate the impact of ARM? Regrettably, ARM has ceased licensing to Russia. Apple and Samsung said earlier this month that they will cease selling products in Russia. Qualcomm also stated that it will no longer provide chips to Russia. Qualcomm is a major semiconductor producer in the globe. Snapdragon 8 series, Snapdragon 7 series the processors are found in common mid to high-end Android devices, and Apple's iPhones have Qualcomm's 5G baseband. Qualcomm is a semiconductor research and development company with no chip production capabilities. However, in recent years, Samsung has produced the majority of Qualcomm's processors. As a result, if Samsung stops exporting products to Russia, Qualcomm will find it difficult to continue selling chips in Russia. Of course, local mobile phones now marketed in Russia may also be affected by Qualcomm and Samsung. Intel and AMD, the world's two major computer chip manufacturers, have declared that they would cease sales in Russia. These two companies supply the majority of the processors used in desktops and laptops, as well as the majority of the chips used in servers. I believe that a computer chip maker cutting off product supply to Russia will have a serious impact on Russia since there are virtually no replacements. ARM, the world's biggest distributor of semiconductor intellectual property, recently declared that it will cease offering goods and service to Russian clients and partners, although it's worth noting that this prohibition is confirmed by email. Of course, emails were often utilized. There is evidence, and some businesses recognize the value of email. According to a Russian media report, on May 5 this year, the British side included the two major Russian processor manufacturers MCST and Belga Electronics on the entity list on the same day, freezing the assets of these two companies in the UK. It is also said that technical services provided by British companies to Russia will be strictly regulated. ARM is a British corporation. This British ruling surely indicates that ARM may be unable or difficult to give Russia with authorization to use the ARM architecture, which means that Russian chip design businesses may likewise be unable to utilize the ARM architecture to create chips. This issue is thought to be more serious than TSMC's halt of shipments. So, how big of an influence will it have? Unfortunately, the end of ARM's business has had a significant impact on Russia, and Russian chips may be forced to fall 15 years behind. Huawei will establish an ARM-based data center at its Moscow office on July 27, 2021. Huawei's Intelligent Computing Systems section created this data center. This is the country's first ARM data center. If it continues to develop quietly, Russia may be unable to rely on this data center to strengthen its position in the software business. However, ARM may now suspend Russia's permission. Everything will be mirrored. Furthermore, because to the disruption of supply by 8 behemoths such as ARM, Mungpo is Russia's most sophisticated chip manufacturer. However, this Ilyushu-based company can only mass-produce 65 nanometers semiconductors. In terms of 65 nanometer advanced process production, TSMC began mass production in 2006, which means that if ARM suspends Russia's ARM architectural permission, Russian chips would be forced to go back 15 years. As a result, competition in the chip area is getting increasingly tough for Russia today, and Russia's market competitiveness may be substantially eroded, which is detrimental to Russia's economic advantages and market position. In summary, if ARM suspends its permission to Russia, the consequences would be severe. Is there any possibility for Russia to survive this catastrophe in these circumstances? Can Russia get through this crisis? In reality, Russia remains optimistic about surviving the crisis. China and Russia released a joint communiqué on November 30, 2021. China and Russia will continue to develop terminal operating systems, according to the joint communiqué. Increase cooperation and do our utmost to boost docking and exchanges between the two nations' industries. This demonstrates that China and Russia continue to work closely together. Russia may not be able to endure this crisis with such a close cooperative base, in terms of chips, with the strengthening of Sino-Russian collaboration. Furthermore, the present chip architecture is not limited to x86 and ARM. On December 20, last year, academician Ni Guangnan of China delivered a speech at the release ceremony of the 16th China Chip Integrated Circuit Promotion Conference and the China Chip Excellent Product Collection event. Among them, Ni Guangnan stated that China can correctly focus on the RISC-V architecture to build the chip industry, allowing it to seize the initiative in the chip industry's development. Although the RISC-V architecture was designed by the University of California, Berkeley, it has a strong openness since it is based in a neutral nation, Sweden, and there should be no fear of getting stuck in the neck by the US. Russia may not be able to find another method to actively develop RISC-V in the face of these issues, and it may not be able to survive this crisis with RISC-V. Of course, independent research is the finest and safest option. Academician Ni Guangnan, after all, stated that key technologies cannot be purchased, rented, or borrowed. However, given Russia's terrible technology, this path may not be viable. However, there is still optimism that Russia will overcome this catastrophe. The suspension of arms permission to Russia should not prolong the problem. In summary, TSMC's shipping stoppage has an impact on Russian chip manufacture. This becomes much more scary when arms supply is cut off. It effectively halts the approval of chip architecture in Russia, which is unquestionably more crucial for Russian chip development. To make matters worse, Russia's future chips may be retrogressed for more than 15 years. However, with today's economic globalization, Russia may be unable to endure the chip development issue. Russia can still rely on itself or China because ARM has shut off its supplies. However, Russia should strengthen its scientific research activities and aim for independent research. After all, only technology in its own hands is the most secure. Thank you for watching. Thanks for having your watching in this video. You can add your ideas or suggestions below. Please keep following our channel and like our videos.